Air, environment. Good. And then it goes on to say that, bringing together the right source of heat, the right kind of fuel, and the right kind of environment is the combination that we need for the correct formula. So, with that brief refresher, let's go ahead and start on page 12. And we're going to start on this side. So, Mark, if you would, please read that first paragraph under God, the ultimate heat source.
God's great love for man and justice makes him the ultimate heat source for every Christian. This desire to save man burned so deeply that Jesus died for the world, while man was still lost in sin. For those who reject his love, Hebrews 12:29 boldly declares, our God is consuming fire.
Okay, so if God is the ultimate heat source, what is God using as heat for us? I'm looking for love. Amy? Okay, good. So let's go ahead and turn to Romans chapter 5 and read verses 6 through 11. And then as soon as we're ready, 2 verses apiece, if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and start us off.
For when we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. For a righteous man will one die, yet perhaps for a good man someone would even dare to die.
But God demonstrates his own love for us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Much more then, having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath through him.
For if while we were enemies we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more, now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. More than that, we also rejoice in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation.
Okay, so a good example here of God's heat source or God's love for us. So if we go back to verse 6, it talks about there, while we were still weak, or in some verses it says without strength. So was there any way for us to work out our own salvation? No. So we're pretty much powerless without God's love. Continuing on, if you look at verse 7, it talks about, so it says, for one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. So I don't know how much you've thought in the past about the differences between a righteous person and a good person. So I kind of looked into that a little bit. And from what I found, generally, most of the time throughout the New Testament, a righteous person and a good person typically means the same thing. But when it's distinguished differently, as they are here, so it's taken as two different things, one of them typically refers to someone doing right by the law or doing what's right. And then the other typically means someone who is agreeable or likable. So if you think about it in those contexts and then reread it again, for one will scarcely die for a righteous person. So scarcely or rarely someone might die for somebody who is doing what's right or living by the law. And then continuing on, though perhaps for a good person, one would dare even to die. So if you like someone, you might, under the right circumstances, be willing to give your life for them. Personally speaking, my own family, without hesitation, very close friends, I would do what I could for them. But for the most part, It's honestly a short list of people that I would willingly just, give my life for. But we know that Christ, he gave his life for everyone. So what does that say about God's love?
I think it's worth pointing out that the howling mob that was there on the day that Jesus was dead, crying out for his crucifixion, when Jesus died to give them a chance, just like all the rest of us. So there's a big gap between what we're looking at, what the Bible is trying to point out here. That maybe you might do it for somebody that you like or love or whatever, but Christ did it for people who absolutely hated him and wanted him dead.
Exactly, and that's a great point. I mean, would anyone here give their life for someone that hated them? I doubt it. I can't answer that for you, but I doubt it. So if we continue to look on further at verse 8, it again talks about how God demonstrates his love and the magnitude of his love, again, by what Mark just said. Christ died not only for likable people, but the unlikable people, the sinners, the people that hated him, the ones that wanted to kill him. So, was everyone living righteously that Christ died for? Kind of just talked about that. No.
Well, I think the emphasis there is now we're Christians. Now, we should be living by God's law and pleasing him through that. But he died for us when we weren't Christians, when we were still sinners. He was still making that sacrifice. And so I think that kind of ties in with that zeal, like how much more fuel should that give us to continue to have that Christian zeal for him because of what's been done for us.
Exactly. That's a good point. He not only died for us, he not died for us while we were Christians, but before we were Christians. So, without that sacrifice, we wouldn't even have the opportunity to become Christians, and therefore the opportunity to get to heaven one day. So if you skip down to verse 10, it refers there. First part it says, "For if while we were enemies," and this kind of again goes to what Kayla was just talking about. So verse 10, it says enemies. If you go back to verse 6, it says the ungodly. If you go to verse 8, it says sinners. All these are pretty negative things, pretty bad things. And again, that just reinforces, the magnitude of the love that was shown. Because if we're not living for God, then we're against God. We're his enemies. If we're not living a righteous lifestyle, we're ungodly. And then we're sinners. But yet Christ still gave his life for all of us. Does anybody have any other comments on that section?
So we talk, we keep putting it in terms of, who would you give your life for, this point on this point, that's a tall order. And I'm not diminishing that, right? We could say that's the highest standard, right? That's obviously, though, we're called, first, bless those who revile you. Like, are we even doing that, right? Can I even say that I do that consistently, right? Even that's hard. So, if we, start there, how effectively can I do that? And now, how much, then how much greater is this total sacrifice that we're talking about? I think that helps. At least for me, that gives me a greater appreciation for how much more Christ did versus what he's initially asking me to do here.
Exactly. That's a good point. All right. And then again, just to kind of end that section, Hebrews 12:29, our God is a consuming fire. So again, going back to that fire metaphor, if we're not burning for God, He's going to be burning against you. He's going to be all consuming against those who do not do His will. So forget where we left off, but whoever's next, can you read that next paragraph under the ultimate heat source section?
Only the passion and fire of God can adequately stir your zeal. Lifelong zeal cannot be built upon self-serving desires or even the passion of others. Lasting zeal is always deeply connected to God and His perfect love. Drawing closer to Him will ignite and intensify your spiritual fire.
Okay, so lasting zeal is always deeply connected to God, and it cannot be built on self-serving desires or even the passion of others. So what are some of those self-serving desires or those passions that can, mislead our zeal to other things? Yeah, pretty much just putting anything in front of God, in front of, exactly. God's not our focus anymore, and we're burning for something else. So how do we make ourselves be better at drawing closer to God and intensifying our spiritual fire? What are some things we can do to make our zeal stronger, to make it last a lifetime?
Study, number one.
Study, grow in knowledge, prayer, all good.
I think to really reflect on life and to look and realize that all that we see is temporary, and the things that are eternal are unseen. And when you spend enough time to get your head around that as best you can, it starts to put in perspective. You look at life in terms of trade. To trade anything in this life for heaven is a bad trade. Anybody think about that believes in God and believes what the Bible teaches us would realize that. I think sometimes it's easy to let life crowd that out and you stop making that calculation. And, spend time just on something, whether it's black reflection, whatever it takes for us to get our minds right and keep them that way.
Exactly. All right, so moving on to the character of Christ. Fletcher, are we at you? Could you read that first paragraph, please?
Lifelong zeal is fueled in your heart when you put on the character of Christ. Just as you build up a campfire with additional logs, every trait of Christ, your God will expand and enhance your zeal.
Okay, so going back to building a fire, we've got our heat source. Now we're looking at the fuel. I don't know how many people here have actually built a fire, but can you build a fire from wet logs? No, it's not possible or not easy at all. So if we look at Christ in His example, clearly there are many examples, many traits that He has that make Him the perfect fuel source for our fire. And just like it says, every trait can enhance our zeal. So, Hannah, if you would read the next paragraph, please.
On one hand, this is great news because the many positive traits of Christ present limitless ways to enhance your zeal. You can easily spend a lifetime growing more like Him. On the other hand, Jesus demonstrates so many wonderful qualities that determining where to begin can be overwhelming. Thankfully, 5 traits repeatedly stand out in Bible passages addressing zeal, and each one is shown to be essential for fueling your spiritual life.
And go ahead and read those, please.
Courage, without it, zeal becomes paralyzed. Energy, without it, zeal becomes worthless. Diligence, without it, zeal becomes disappointing. Wisdom, without it, zeal becomes deadly. Loving service, without it, zeal becomes selfish.
Okay, so just like it says, many examples that we can see on the good traits that Christ exhibited. So let's take a look now at these 5, looking at the essential fuels over on the right-hand side of the page. So does anybody have an example where Christ showed his courage?
When he died for us.
Yeah? Does anybody have anything else?
Well, I often think about when he was traveling to Jerusalem, knowing full well what was waiting for him there. To me, that's one of the most courageous acts that I can think of. To know that there's certain death, and I'm not talking about a quick, easy death. We're talking about a painful, agonizing death. And yet, to love mankind that much, to keep going, it's amazing to me.
It is. And often in these examples, Christ exhibits multiple, if not all of these traits in the same example, which is another testament to how good his character really is for us to follow. So one that I had was, when he was standing in front of Pilate, he could have denied, no, I'm not who they say I am. But he stood up and he said, yes, I am the Christ. So does anybody have any examples where Christ showed great energy?
Or in Gethsemane, when he stayed awake and everyone else stayed asleep, I think there's an example on Mount Sinai, or one of the mounts also, where he stayed awake and told everybody else to stay awake, and they were all fell asleep.
Yeah, it takes a lot of focus sometimes, and we see that in Christ. When others were physically tired, and I'm sure mentally tired as well, all he did was ask them to just be there for him, and they couldn't do it. But Christ carried on. He continued to pray. He continued to do God's will.
I mean, they were asleep in the boat, and he was walking on water. So.
Yeah. All right. An example of Christ's great diligence.
Just doing the Father's will. I mean, that's kind of broad, but.
Yeah. I had in Matthew 4, when Christ was tempted by Satan, he continually said no. He was very diligent to keeping with not letting sin come into his life and remaining perfect.
I mean, like you said, more than one of these applies courage. They would all apply.
Exactly. Yeah.
Even when he went to the wilderness, he showed a lot of energy. 40 days, 40 nights for that.
Yeah. All right. Anyone have an example of Christ's wisdom?
Yeah, terrible.
Yeah. Dan?
Think about the episode in which the woman was caught in adultery.
That's a good one.
And instead of high energy scene, right? Instead of jumping into that or acting the way the mob is acting and whether for or against that, he's instead completely counters it, right? Neutralizes the whole thing, throwing on the ground, totally out of left field, but they don't know what to do with it. And when you look at that big picture, that was the way to handle that.
Yeah. Very good. All good examples. All right, and then Christ's service. Anyone have? That's a good one. That's what I had. Yeah.
Healing the sick, just throughout.
All right, moving on to the optimum environment. Let's see. go ahead and come up here. So, Warren, would you read the first paragraph there on page 13? Yes.
It is hard to build a roaring fire during a downpour. In the same way, it is hard to build a lifelong zeal and sin, evil influence, and bad choices extinguish your spiritual fire. What Christians really need is an environment that is productive, both nurturing and challenging their zeal. This is done by pursuing purity in the face of the corruption all around. Jesus warned the disciples about the powerful influence of the Holy Spirit and called them prepared for these threats. For example, Matthew 10:16 says, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves."
Okay, so we've got our heat source, God's love. We've got our fuel, the characteristics of Christ. And now we're on to our environment, purity. And when you think about the environment of starting a fire, again, if it's pouring outside or if it's really windy, are you going to have an easy time lighting that fire? No. So when you think about the environment of your zeal, having an environment that's both nurturing and challenging, when you think about that, why is it important to have both of those?
I think you need to challenge your zeal to keep it growing.
Okay.
By teaching and you just have to challenge it.
Exactly.
Or stagnant.
Exactly. We read, not to be lukewarm. And if we're not challenging ourselves, if we're not growing as Christians, what are we going to end up being? So.
I mean, lukewarm is like sitting on the middle of the fence. There's no middle of the fence.
Exactly.
You're either on one side or you're on the other.
Exactly. So how about the nurturing side of things? Why is that important for our zeal environment?
To keep it growing. I mean, just moving it along.
Yeah, kind of the same thing, but a little different. It's important to realize that it's going to be hard at times, and we're going to need some help. So, to have fellow Christians as support, or to read the examples that we see in the Bible that people struggled. It's not going to be easy, and we need to be prepared for that and be ready.
And if you have the right kind of environment, I think that's when your zeal will take off. If you don't have the right environment, you can tank. I mean,
yeah.
Either way, because challenges are supposed to help you, build your relationship with God and your zeal and all that. But like I said, if you don't have the right environment, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
There's an interesting thing in my mind about God's word and the life of a Christian. God's word is static. It's not going to change. It's what it is. It's the same today as it was 2,000 years ago. But the life of a Christian, if we are static in our lives as a Christian, we will die. Because we can't. Using the analogy of fire. If the fire starts with fuel, eventually it will go out. And the same thing he says for our lives as Christians. If we're not engaged, we're not, whether you look at it as zeal or fueling the fire or whatever, you have to constantly be doing things to add to it. Otherwise, it will go out.
Yep.
The environment part of this kind of reminds me a lot of my second graders.
Mm-hmm.
Just that combination between challenging and nurturing. Like a big thing that we do in second grade is addition and subtraction with regrouping and borrowing, and that is so hard for second graders. And it's that challenging part of it. And if I just teach it and give them the work and then step back, they're going to burn out they're going to get frustrated. They're not going to understand it. So along with that challenge, they have to know that I'm on their side. They have to get that encouragement. They also have to know when they're making mistakes and what mistakes they're making. And I think that's part of that nurturing environment too, when we come together as a church family and when we're able to point out that error and encourage each other to keep growing and keep getting better. That's what keeps that zeal consistent. It keeps us growing.
Yep. So let me ask you this. Can you build a fire without both a nurturing and challenging environment? Is it possible to do it with just one?
Might work for a little while, but
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. You might be able to get a little something going, but it's going to peter out real quick. All right. So, Tina, would you go ahead and read the second paragraph there under the purity section?
Just as you cannot control the weather, you cannot completely control your environment. But if you want to keep the flames of your zeal burning brightly, then you must seek purity in the areas you can influence, especially the purity of your heart.
Okay, and Tony, would you turn to Malachi 3:3?
He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. He will purify the sons of Levi and purge them as gold and silver, that they may offer to the Lord an offering in righteousness.
Okay, so when you think about gold and silver and a refinery, how important is it to get it pure? Like if you're thinking about making jewelry, is it more valuable the more pure it is?
Wouldn't it be more stronger too?
Yeah.
Purity's out of it.
It's stronger, it's more valuable, it's more desirable. So, EJ, you feel like reading? 1 John 2:15.
Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him.
Okay, so if your thoughts, your focus, your love is on things of this world, are you going to be creating an environment that fuels your zeal for God? No, it's selfish. It's going to throw you completely off course.
we've got a lot of that in church. That's sad.
It is.
Done before the Lord. Shouldn't be that way.
Yep. Yeah, all too often it's about self and not about God. So the bottom line, God's metaphor for zeal makes remembering and applying the basics easy. Your spiritual fire depends on God as your ultimate heat source, Christ's character as your perfect fuel, and purity, your optimum environment. So if we take a look at the questions, I'm not going to ask the first one because it seems more personal. So if you want to turn to page 14 and look at number 2, what attributes of God most excite you?
He's all knowing. He's everything.
Yeah?
I think that one of the main things that impresses me about God is that there is no part of the universe that's not known by Him.
It's almost difficult to even imagine the things that God knows and can do.
Power.
Yeah.
Comprehend it.
Yeah, we really can't. Okay.
And his love for us too.
Yeah, it's what we need for our fire. So I'm not going to ask the second part of number 2 because, again, that seems more personal. So moving on to number 3, what character traits of Christ have you developed that now make a tremendous difference in the way you live? And this doesn't have to be, you don't have to give personal examples from your life, but, what things do we see that Christ has done that helps people become more zealous for God?
He understands our struggles because he's been here.
Yeah, and that's huge. If you know what someone else is going through, you can empathize and help out a lot more. Okay, so let's go on to number 4. What positive influences in your environment have helped your zeal grow the most? So again, thinking about different things in the environment, and this can be personal. It can be more in the church setting. Does anybody have any examples?
We've never attended a church, like, been with a church where they had young people. Like, we attended a lot of older congregations before we moved here, so I know having younger people has been very beneficial to me because I didn't grow up in a church, so that's been helpful to me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And the example that comes to my mind is, who designed the structure of the church?
God did.
God. And does God know what he's doing? So there's a reason that we do things the way we do. There's a reason God outlined this plan for us to follow. It's because he knew what we would need and what things would be beneficial for us as we're here, building our zeal, trying to serve him, trying to get through this life, pretty much.
And we should surround ourselves with like-minded Christians, because we all have the same goal in mind. I think that helps us all.
Absolutely. All right. So, what negative influences in the environment can threaten your zeal?
Sometimes in areas that you work and how people act at work, it's not always the best.
Yeah, going back to what Janet just said, being surrounded by like-minded people can be a critical thing. If you're constantly around people who are ungodly and don't care about serving God, it's going to be difficult at times to remain faithful because you're constantly going to be faced with pressure. You're constantly going to be on your own. So, being here, being out in public. Yeah.
I think talking about the purity and the environment, we spent most of our conversation tonight talking about the outward environment and things that we may or may not control. And the author on page 13 spent a good time talking about the internal environment and the sin that we may or may not have in our life. So I think the huge negative impact there is when we get so focused on what people are doing around us that we forget to deal with the sin in our own lives. That will kill your zeal faster than anything else external you may be exposed to.
Yeah, that's a great point. If we're not focused on the internal environment as well as the external, we definitely need to be aware that both of those are a factor.
Well, we don't always have control over our external environment either. I mean, we have to work, we have to, provide, and so how we're doing that, we don't always have control over the people that we're spending time around. To Misty's point, we have control over our internal environment. So, I mean, thinking back to like that fire analogy, if you're out camping and it's windy, you don't necessarily have control over that factor matter of your environment. But the internal stuff, we have control over that.
Right.
To that point, if it's windy, you're going to build a fire. You're going to build something to block the wind so that you can build that fire.
Yeah. All right. Does anybody have any other comments on chapter 2?
It seems like we focus more on the natural things around us than we do really of heaven. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 5 that he groaned, that he meditated, or it was constantly on his mind of heaven. We lose sight of that sometimes, and we think more of things around us, of the environment where we're living in, and therefore our zeal becomes weak because we're looking at everything around us and not focusing on what's ahead of us.
Yeah, that's a great point. We always have to keep the end goal in mind, or we can get distracted. All right, if there's no other comments, that'll wrap up chapter 2. I've got just a couple minutes here. I guess we can go ahead and introduce chapter 3 for next week. So, 7 steps to follow in God's process. Do you want to read the first paragraph? Just how Jesus starts a spiritual fire on page 15.
Learning to combine the right heat, fuel, and environment to create lifelong zeal is straightforward and helpful. But even more helpful is learning how Jesus used these components to build a spiritual fire in others. In this lesson, you'll explore the step-by-step process Jesus used to build lifelong zeal in Peter and his other followers.
Okay, so again, going back to Christ and the examples that we see from him. And just to briefly get into this, what are some ways Christ used to light that fire in those that were around him?
Are you talking like miracles?
Yeah, that's one example.
Just his teachings alone.
Mm-hmm. So it didn't always have to be miraculous. He could tell a parable and just help people understand. All right, Misty, would you read the next paragraph, please?
When Jesus built zeal in others, he didn't act randomly. He followed a recognizable process that produced lasting results. His process was so effective at building up the apostles' zeal that they were able to replicate it in many others.
And Scott, if you want to go ahead and finish the page.
The steps Jesus took are easy to remember because they are directly related to the common steps used to build a physical fire. Can you read the rest?
Yes, please.
If you've ever enjoyed a campfire, think for a moment about how it was built and used, what was the first thing you did to get it started. Once the fire was lit, how did you use it? You likely used a process similar to this. Prepare a place, get a lighter or match, arrange your firewood, shield it from the wind or rain, cook some s'mores, share its heat, stir the coals.
Okay, so thinking about the process, is it important to do things in the right order? Yes. We're not just going to walk into a church, be baptized, walk up here, start preaching. We need to grow. So that's the end of class. Thanks everybody for your comments. We'll be picking up on chapter 3 next week.
Excuse me.
Good evening. Good to see everybody here again at midweek. Dustin will be back up here in just a moment to deliver the invitation for us tonight. Before that, though, go ahead and turn in your songbooks to 163. 163, we will be singing that after Dustin's invitation. Once you have turned to 163, go ahead and flip back a few pages to 136. We will sing 136 now. Faith of our fathers living still, in spite of mountain, fire, and sword. Oh, how our hearts beat high with joy, whenever we hear that glorious word. Faith of our fathers, holy faith, we will be true to thee till death. Our fathers trained in praise and start, we're still in heart and conscience free. How sweet would be their children's faith, if they like them could die for thee. Faith of our fathers, holy faith, we will be true to thee till death. Faith of our fathers, we will love, both friend and foe, in all our strife, and preach thee to as long those sounds, by kindly words and precious love. Faith of our fathers, holy faith, we will be true to thee till death.
invite you to take your Bibles out. I'm shortly going to be reading from Matthew chapter 26. So I've titled this invitation, I Don't Want To Is Not an Excuse. So if you think about that, there are many instances in our lives, whether it's at work or doing household chores or whatever, we just don't want to do things. I'm not a huge fan of doing the dishes. Just ask my wife. Just don't want to do it. But I don't want to is not an excuse. So if you look at Matthew chapter 26, I'm going to read verse 39. And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. So we can see here, this is where Christ is in the garden praying. He knows what's coming, but he doesn't really want to do it, but he knows he has to. In a way, I don't want to. If it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Is there any other way? Do I really have to? I don't want to. That's not what Christ continued to say. Christ said, not as I will, but as you will. So if there's something in your life that is stopping you from becoming a Christian because you don't want to give it up or you don't want to deal with it, please get around that obstacle. If you're already a Christian and there's something stopping you from growing and living as you should be because you just don't want to give it up or you just don't want to do it, please ask us for help. We will help you. We will figure out a way to get you around that. Because I don't want to is not an excuse. When you face God, telling him I didn't want to do that, I didn't want to give that up in my life, it's not gonna cut it. So if there's anything in your life that is holding you back because you don't want to, please come forward and let us help you. We offer you this time as we stand and sing.
Give me thy heart. Give me thy heart. Give the softest from this thy word, he would draw thee apart. Sing so tenderly. Give me thy heart. Give me thy heart, says the Savior of men, calling in mercy again and again. Turn now from sin and from evil depart, and I not thy good be. Give me thy heart. Give me thy heart. Give me thy heart. Hear the song whisper wherever thou art. From this dark world, he would draw thee apart, seeking so tenderly. Give me thy heart. Give me thy heart, says the Spirit divine. All that thou hast to my keeping resign. Grace more of thy heart. Make surrender and give me thy heart. Give me thy heart. Hear the soft whisper wherever thou art. From this dark world he will draw me apart. Singing joy and give me thy heart.
Again, good to see everybody here this evening. Thanks to Dustin for pulling the infamous double shift for us this evening, covering the adult class. Also the invitation for us as well, giving us some good things to dwell on as we prepare to leave here in just a short while. Got a good crowd here for midweek. It's always encouraging. Any things we need to make mention of before we're dismissed in prayer, Mark?
Ellen will be late tonight, and also he will be absent.
We had Jeremy Nettles and family with us over the weekend. If you haven't done so yet, I would encourage you again. If you've got any feedback on Jeremy, positive or negative, we need to get that in the hands of the gentlemen on the search committee. That's Mark, Tony, Tim Clark, Dustin, or Matt. Email one of them, email all of them, grab them after services. Whatever works best for you. We do need to get that information over to them so they know how the congregation received him and how they need to proceed from there. I usefully just forgot his name. We do have a guest speaker coming in this weekend as well. Gentleman from Louisville. No, but we're not evaluating him as a potential candidate here. Again, forget this guy's name, so I apologize. He wanted to help out. Used to preach, has a secular job now, and is filling in this weekend for us. We look forward, of course, to that. Other things we need to make mention of yet this evening. Don't see any takers. So with that, we'll ask everybody, obviously, to drive safely. If there was any water on the roads, it is certainly refrozen by now. Again, good to see all of us here tonight. I did not see if who was listed on the board for closing prayer. Tony, would you mind wording that for us, please?
Our Heavenly Father, we're thankful for this opportunity to be here with fellow Christians midweek Bible study, to come together and study another portion of our Word, to edify one another, and to be precious going through this rest of this week until we return the next Wednesday to worship, sing praises unto thy name. We pray for the work that is being done here at River Ridge. We pray that we will stand for the truth in this place, that we will always be a shining light in this community, and that we as Christians will always be a shining light in the communities in which we live and in which we work. We pray for those of our number who aren't able to be with us this evening, whether we're on the road to travel or home due to illness. We pray that you will watch over them. We pray that you watch over each and every one of us. We're thankful for your Son, our Savior, and the sacrifice on the cross on our behalf. We ask that you go with us now, and it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.